But I'm going to tell you this, we ain't done yet.
Howdy. Welcome in and welcome back to the Ineligibles Podcast. I'm your host, Will Stone. He's Chase Caldwell.
I'm Chase Caldwell.
A little early morning pod. He's Chase Caldwell. A little early morning pod to pull the curtain back. We typically record in the afternoons and evenings, but something just felt a little different today. We wanted to, get up and record on the day we plan on releasing. It is 6/9, big day. It's launch day. So, Chase, how are we feeling?
I'm feeling great. I'm ready to go, ready to get this stuff out there, ready for all of my buddies to send me text messages making fun of me on things that I said in the first episode or maybe this episode. So just can't wait. It's going to be a good time.
Yeah. This is what we do it for. We got our intro episode out of the way, which was good, but this is the stuff that we're really excited about. This is the content that we plan on providing, week in and week out. We're pumped to get started.
Yeah, listen to that first episode. We did good. I mean, it was exactly what we needed it to be, so that people could go refer back to it later on, know who we are and kind of what our background is and things like that, without having to listen to an hour-long episode of, old recruiting information. So that's what we wanted it for, but it was a really awkward one to record because it's like being in an interview. You're like telling about yourself, but you don't really have a topic to talk about. So I'm excited. I think anybody that listened to our first one and came back for the second one, number one, thank you and welcome back. If this is your first time listening to us, I think you'll have a much better representation of what this podcast is really going to sound like because even though that first one's a great episode, I think this one will be more in tune to what we're shooting for. So I'm glad to have anybody listening, and we've got a good show for you today.
Yeah, and we appreciate you listening. And while we're at it, before we get too far into the weeds, go hit subscribe on our podcast. Give us a 5-star rating. That really boosts our visibility with Apple and kind of helps us gain some more followers and move up some lists. Go follow at Ineligible Pod on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at WillStoneCFB. You can follow Chase on Twitter at Texas Aggies 15. So with that being said, let's get into it. I know it's June, but there's kind of a college football buzz going on right now.
Yeah, there is.
I feel like there's been big news, each day with recruits getting back on campus, and there's some playoff talk and stuff like that, and there's a bear on the loose. We'll get into that at a later date, but just keep that in mind. Our topic today is just the overall state of the A&M program. We talked, on our intro show about how A&M is, primed to enter its golden era. And we just wanted to get into that a little bit more and tell you why we feel that way. And it's not because we just went 9-1. I know there's a lot of fans of opposing fan bases that think A&M just had their best year ever and now they're all cocky and things like that. But I think Chase and I both expect even much better things than last year. Last year was far from our high watermark under Jimbo Fisher.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be set up that, of course, we've already talked about. We've talked about at length in the past, but there's just a lot of factors in play that any factor that you go to, if you say, okay, well, let's talk recruiting. Well, recruiting isn't everything, and then, okay, let's talk player development. Well, player development isn't everything. Let's talk coaching. Coaching isn't everything. But each thing that you talk about, even though it's not everything, each one is better than what we've had in the past. And so,
it all works together.
Not to dog on anything that we've had in the past. And I think both you and I feel that way, that We always want to make sure that whenever we compliment what's going on now, or we compliment what's, something going on with the team, like, oh man, the receivers look fantastic. That's really not there to kind of dog on anybody else. But just the setup of what we've got in our program, I think is something that, there's a lot to be excited about, and we're going to dig into that today.
Yeah, let's talk good jobs for a second, because I feel like people see these. It happens every offseason, or at least every time a quote unquote blue blood program is changing coaches. They're like, Georgia is the best job in the country. Texas is the best job in the country. And I think when you get down to it, there's probably 15 to 20 pretty like good jobs, that have the resources, the commitment to win at a high level. And A&M is one of those now. It maybe wasn't in the past. I know we had some really good, solid years under Jackie and under RC, but the level of commitment from the donors, the money coming in from the SEC, all of that, and good leadership at the top. We had a good AD, Scott Woodward, who's now at LSU, who brought in Jimbo, and our new AD, Ross Bjork, this morning just hired the TCU baseball coach, Jim Schlossnagel, to replace Rob Childress. So the money and leadership is definitely there to compete at the highest level, and that's what we expect to see.
Yeah, and I think when you're talking good jobs, it depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to an average fan, they're going to attribute a good job to teams who have won in the past, and have a track record of winning. If you talk to a coach, you might get a different story. They're going to want support from the donors. They're going to want support from the fan base as a whole. And more importantly than anything else, they're going to want support from their administration. And
Right.
You find that around the country. I think in the modern day of college football, we've really, really gotten into this thing where it's a win at all cost mentality. And this is something we definitely will get into, because, it's very rare nowadays for a coach to have a contract longer than 4 or 5 years. That these schools think that they should hold their coaches' feet to the fire right away. And they don't really give them time to build. They pretend like they give them time to build. They say, okay, well, we're going to, we know that this year is a good, is one of those years that's rebuilding, and you're not going to do as well. So it's okay that you had an off year this year. It's okay that you have an off year this year. But then by the third year, people are really saying like, oh, we need to fire them and get a new coach. Our last coach was better. Our next coach needs to be setting the world on fire. And you don't give these guys time to really build. Now, I remember that being my favorite thing about us hiring Jimbo. It still is one of my favorite things about us hiring Jimbo, is that we gave him a 10-year contract, and that's really rare nowadays. And if you want to set yourself apart in anything, you have to take risks. And if you're taking a risk by saying, hey, even though nobody else is doing this, we're going to give out this 10-year contract to a completely brand new coach to us that is unproven to be successful at our school, we're going to do it anyways. You're taking a risk by doing that, sure. But I think you're taking a really good risk. I mean, my opinion was
absolutely
that this is fantastic, because while all the other coaches around the country, for the most part, other than ones like Nick Saban or somebody who's won a tremendous amount at the school that they're currently at, they're always worried about their job. They're always, 1 foot out the door, because they have to be. That's the culture that we've created in modern college football, and really modern high school football is similar. I mean, it's like win or get fired, and it creates this sense of there's not as much loyalty, I guess you could say, to a school as if, I know it's been like this for a long time, but you just look kind of into the past and you can see coaches that it seems like just really loved the schools that they were at. I would say R.C. Slocum is very much like that. Like, you could tell he just loves A&M. And so you just feel like you don't ever see that anymore. And I don't know. I'm speaking for myself here, but I feel like Jimbo has fallen in love with A&M. He just seems like he's just a perfect fit here. And when you put too much pressure on somebody to be successful, a lot of times you end up being like Lennian of Mice and Men, like you end up just squeezing them so tight that you end up choking them out, and you give somebody a little bit of leeway to do their job and look out, you know what I mean? And I think that's what we're beginning to see.
I think that's a good point. I think at some programs and even at A&M sometimes, like there's, boosters with a ton of money that want to micromanage and, hey, I'm funding this. I want it this way. Mm-hmm. The way it is right now at A&M, Jimbo is the guy. Like, he's calling all the shots. It's all on him, any success or failure. If he fails, hey, it's on you, Jimbo. And we're going to have to make a change. Obviously not right now because we're having some success, but they've really put it all on him to make all the decisions, like who to hire as far as coaches, improvements to make in terms of facilities. He's kind of the guy with the power in that regard. And back to what I was saying earlier about good jobs, I think you made a good point to where we took that risk because good jobs are dependent on who the coach is. Mm-hmm. Every list that I talked about earlier will list Georgia as a better job than Alabama. Alabama has 19 titles and Georgia has 1. Why is that? Right. It's coaching. They had Bear Bryant and Nick Saban, and Georgia just hasn't found their coach yet. Yeah. Texas had Mac Brown and Darrell Royal, who were both amazing, but now they've had, before that they had a bunch of coaches they didn't like that weren't successful. Mm-hmm. They had Charlie, who was a disaster. They had Herman, who they just fired. Not to dog on them, like it's hard to find a good coach. There's very, very few of them, and once you find one, like Texas A&M saw in Jimbo, they did everything they could to get him here. A 10-year contract, $75 million, like whatever. Yeah,
Yeah, and that's where I think again, you're taking a risk by doing that. Because he could have come in as a lame duck and just been like, okay, I'll just retire here. And he's guaranteed 10 years. So even if we fire him during that time, we got to pay him out. Yeah. So he could have done that. You
and I know that's not the case with
him. Yeah, he could have done that. And that's what you see, like if you're talking about, starting a business, if you're talking about any kind of something like that, where you take somebody that's good at what they do and you just let them do it, then you run that risk. You run the risk of them being super lazy and just not doing anything because you're allowing them some leeway, or you allow them to take their creative control and run with it. And
right.
I think Jimbo, to this point, we're 4 years into this thing. I think he's really proven that he's not just laying down. He's not just taking an early retirement with this guaranteed contract. And so just at where we're at right now, even if Jimbo never brings A&M a title, I think it was a really good decision by A&M to bring him in. Absolutely. To sign that 10-year contract. I think no matter what, we made a really good decision on that, and so I'm really happy with that. But yeah, you're right on the what's considered a good job. There's plenty around the country that people would say, oh, that's a great job. And if you ask anybody, they're going to refer to their alma mater as a good job. They're going to know all the reasons why they love it. And sometimes you gotta think about that with A&M and be like, okay, are we saying this because we love A&M so much? But it's just, there's so many things, and we'll get into it, of course, but so many things that line up at A&M that, you know, we're the closest school to one of the biggest recruiting hotbeds in the world, or in the whole United States, being Houston. You know, we're the closest school to it. You can be in Houston in an hour and a half from College Station. That's huge, you know. And even I know Austin, you know, is still a big time contender for that, but we're in between Austin and Houston. You know what I mean? Like we're closer to Houston from Austin, you know.
And it's still just 3 hours from Dallas, and it's close to, you know, East Texas, which is a hotbed for talent.
And so that's the next step that we're about to talk about is recruiting. And you know, we've got it set up as a great job, not only because we have great alumni support. You know, I mean, we would rival anybody's alumni support, and I think just about anybody I've ever talked to from any other school will always say, "Okay, yeah, Aggies are going to take care of their own." And of course, we take pride in that, you know. But when it comes to recruiting, we're in one of the just deepest states that there is, if not the deepest state, you know, for recruiting. And so one of the things we hear with recruiting all the time is that, oh, you got to win your state. You know, don't let Alabama or somebody else come and cherry pick recruits. Well, we might have 46 blue chip recruits in one class in the state of Texas. Well, we can't pull 46 recruits in one class, you know, so who cares if they come and cherry pick one or two of them, because they're going to have to, you know. But whenever you're in Alabama or a Georgia or, you know, a Tennessee, where you have 2 blue chip recruits in your state and we go and cherry pick that one, that's a much bigger deal, you know, because that would be as if Alabama came and cherry picked 20 blue chip recruits from Texas, you know, just by us grabbing that one, we're grabbing a lot of them. So let's get into recruiting, you know, and kind of what we're looking at there.
Yeah. Well, and on that note, talking about cherry picking, I think it was the 2020 class. We had, I'm pretty sure we had the top player in Texas. I can't remember if it was Damon Demas or Jalen Jones. And then we took the top player from Arkansas. We took the top player from Missouri and the top player from Illinois. So just like really, you know, cherry picking national, if you either if it's a down year in state, or if maybe there were some good players at those positions, but they just weren't feeling A&M for whatever reason. That happens sometimes.
Yeah.
But as far as recruiting and like how it's different, I feel like to the casual fan who doesn't follow recruiting as closely as we do, and it's not like in the weeds on it, like they think, well, hey, Kevin Sumlin recruited well and he wasn't successful, so if Jimbo's recruiting well, then why is that any different? And it's actually a drastic difference when you really get down to it.
It is.
I know Chase has the numbers pulled up, but in terms of so hang on, back up one second before I get too far into this. There's a formula. It's very simple. It's called the blue chip ratio. It was coined by Bud Elliott, who now works for 24/7 Sports. And all the blue chip ratio means is to win a national championship, you have to recruit more 4 and 5 stars than you do 3 stars. Mm-hmm. So your blue chip ratio of your team has to be greater than or equal to 50%. Now, it's not saying that, you know, if you recruit that percentage, you're going to win and you're going to be successful, because at one point, both Charlie Strong and Kevin Sumlin were above that threshold. But it is a requirement for winning the whole thing, you know, which is what A&M's goal is. So you look at any team in the modern recruiting era, you know, Alabama, LSU, Ohio State, they've all been above that threshold.
And I don't know if you mentioned this or not, but I do want to make this or just say this for anybody that's listening to us that isn't hasn't ever followed college football recruiting at all. a blue chip is considered a 4 or 5 star player. So somebody that you all have the stars on all of the different recruits. So either a 4 star or a 5 star. So what Will and I have talked at length about is just the overall average of how many of those players that we bring in each year are 4 and 5 star players. And so you alluded to, Will, or you mentioned there that okay, well, Coach Sumlin recruited well, but he didn't recruit, or he still didn't have a ton of success. And there's some points that we'll get into on that. But starting at just looking at the overall recruiting numbers, 247 puts out a composite score at the end of the year to show what the recruiting class ranking or what the score of the class would be. And that's not everything. Let's be clear that it's not everything, but it's one of those things, like I mentioned earlier. Everything we're going to talk about is, oh, well, that's not everything, but yet it's good. And that's not everything, but it's good. And once you start getting a whole bunch of those put together, then suddenly, okay, it may not be everything, but all the things that it's not, are still doing good too. So when Jimbo came in, or let's just look at Sumlin first. Sumlin brought us some of the absolute best recruiting classes we had ever had to that point. He was really, really doing a great job bringing in those classes, and he really was a good recruiter. And so you shouldn't ever say otherwise about someone, because he did recruit very well, and especially on paper. So when you're looking at our recruiting classes during Sumlin, they were some of our best classes since the modern recruiting era started. But then Jimbo came in, and his 2018 class was our, third ranked class at the time. So it was top 3 of what we had ever seen. I'm sorry, it's top 4. So it was the number 4 class since 2000. Since this millennium, he had the number 4 class that Texas A&M had ever had.
And by the way, he did that with that was the first year of the early signing period.
Yeah, and so he had a month.
Yeah, well, he had 2 weeks.
2 weeks. Yeah, it was a very short period of time.
Yeah, and then pretty much everyone in the country signed early, so he had the rest of January and that first week of February to kind of work on anyone who didn't sign, which was a much smaller pool than it would have been in past years.
Yeah, and so then the next year, 2019, he signs the best class that we have ever signed. Texas A&M's best class ever. Was he follow that up in 2020 with Texas A&M's best class ever? So he beat his last class, And then 2021, he almost crested that. He
was close.
He was about to get 3 in a row, and it didn't end up. But 2021 became the second best class we had ever had. So it beat his original 2019 class, but it didn't beat his 2020 class. So if you're looking strictly at historical classes at Texas A&M, our best 3 classes ever were our last 3 classes. And the way things are tracking right now, the 2022 class is setting itself up to be the best class we've ever had. And it might be one that he sets the bar so high on that maybe he never crests and continue. He doesn't continue this track record where he just keeps setting the best class ever, because maybe it's that he sets one so high it's hard to ever attain again. But it's just, you look at that, the best 3 classes are the last 3 classes, and they're all on campus and they're all on the same team.
That's right.
And that's a really, really cool number. But I've got the numbers for the blue chip ratio too. And so when you're looking at the blue chip ratio, those 4 classes, 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021. Now this isn't exactly how it works, but it's just kind of, easy talking points here. In those 4 classes, total of 97 players, he signed 58 4- and 5-star players. So that gives you a 60% blue chip ratio. So he's crested that 50% number really well. Now, of course, you would have to look at the players on the team as well, and some of these 4- and 5-star players have either gone into the league or they have moved on for whatever reason. So it's not everything. Just looking at these numbers, and I realize that it's just talking points, and so. But when you compare that to someone's numbers of 96 players and 51 blue chips, he was right at 53% blue chip ratio. So he had just kind of crested that. And so, so if anybody ever says that someone was a bad recruiter or that he wasn't a good coach when it came to, building a team or whatever, they're not necessarily right, because he really was good at building and recruiting. It just didn't really get to the point that it needed to get to. But the crescendo that someone created, Jimbo continued, and that's why we're seeing, or that's one of the reasons why we're seeing such great recruiting right now. But then we're also, I know Will, going to talk about team or how those recruits fit into the team. So let's get into that. Mention that, or what you were telling me about. Getting the players in the right positions.
Yeah. Well, I've got some points on some of the stuff you just talked about there.
Yeah.
First of all, I will bet anyone $100 that this coming in class 2022 for A&M will be its best ever, and I think it won't even be close. As far as our blue chip ratio, you said it's at 60%.
Mm-hmm.
That's already, and this doesn't mean everything, but that's greater than what Jimbo had at Florida State the year that he won the title. I think they were at like 53.
Oh, wow.
And that team was loaded with NFL prospects. And lastly, someone was a good recruiter, but he just wasn't a great recruiter. And that's what Jimbo is. Mm-hmm. Just able to take it to the next level and put us among the elites. Like every year, we're going to be up there with Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, Clemson. Like A&M's going to be in that company and is going to bring in that level of talent to compete with those teams and compete for a championship. So moving on, I think we want to get into to coaching style for Jimbo and kind of how that contributes to our success. Mm-hmm. So Jimbo is not like a big difference between him and Sumlin is Jimbo is not a CEO coach. He's much more cut from the Saban cloth to where he's hands-on. He's got his he's in every drill, coaching the players up and things like that. And not that like both of these things can work. Like I think Dabo Swinney is a CEO head coach.
Well, yeah, it goes back to what we were talking about when we talked about Jimbo, in that when you give somebody the creative control to be able to do their job, you're taking a risk. And so CEO coaches definitely are really, really, it's very possible that they have tremendous success, but what they do is they take that risk every day by giving a lot more control to their coaching staff and letting those guys do what they do. And so you end up seeing a lot of CEO coaches take that risk and then not get a good enough staff to support that risk. And so it ends up not working. But yeah, like you said, he's not a CEO coach, not to dog on CEO coaches, but that's a big contrast to what we saw before.
Yeah, Sumlin was like, he was the epitome of CEO coach. Like At practice, like he's just kind of steering the ship, and it was the plan of hire elite coordinators and really good position coaches, kind of let them handle their sides of the ball, and that sort of thing. And it works for Clemson. Dabo has always had good assistants. He's had one of the best defensive coordinators in the game for probably closing in on a decade. And then if you look at LSU, Ed Orgeron is is the poster child for CEO coaches. And I think I definitely prefer to have a coach like Jimbo so you're not so dependent on those coordinator hires. Like
I was about to say the exact same thing. Yeah.
This is going to be Jimbo's team and Jimbo's offense, and he's the one that it depends on, and not your assistant.
Well, and that's what you just look at Sumlin. Sumlin had a lot of success, through the years, and he even had a lot of success at A&M, even though we didn't bring back a title. I mean, he still was a really good coach in the sense that he was able to build several good coaching staffs, But the problem with that CEO coach mentality is that you've got to be like Dabo, where you hold on to, coaches for a really long time, because if they move on, suddenly you're left having to replace them. And when you have a really, really good coach or a really, really good coordinator, trying to replace them with a really good coordinator isn't always easy. And when you have a good head coach that is hands-on and does that, you see less drop-off with coordinators leaving or,
Right.
assistant coaches leaving or for that matter, grad assistants leaving. I know a lot of people get all freaked out whenever we see grad assistants leave, but at the end of the day, they're not what's recruiting, people to A&M. And I think people need to remember that for people who get really into recruiting. We can't be what's the word? Hypocritical, I guess. Like you hear a lot of people dog on Texas because, they hired Sark and they're like, oh, well, they're claiming all of Alabama's recruits, but people go to Alabama for, Nick Saban. They don't go for the assistant coaches. But then at the same time, we lose a grad assistant and everybody freaks out that our recruiting is going to go downhill. And it's just, we're in the same boat. People are coming to Jimbo to play for Jimbo. They're not coming to play for a grad assistant. Not dogging on the grad assistants because we have a great staff, it seems like, in a lot of different places. But, we're in that place. We have a coaching staff where the guy at the top is the guy that everybody wants to play for, and everything else is just icing on the cake, instead of being set up to where everybody's coming in to play for, the chief, and then whenever he's gone or whatever, that was a bad example in that sense, I guess. But, you get like Cliff Kingsbury comes in, great OC, and then whenever he's gone, well, now we got to replace him, and so.
Yeah. Well, I think the chief example was okay because, you can make the case that, that Tyrell Dotson left early because Chief was no longer here.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think I remember that. I think I remember that being a thing. But anyway, like I think the main thing we're trying to get at here is Jimbo's the one calling the shots. It all comes down to him. He's got full control over the football program. It is not as dependent on his assistants as other coaches have been. And on that note, I know A&M has a great DC right now in Mike Elko. He's maybe the best in the country. If not, he's second best. It's him and Brent Venables at Clemson. He's a total stud of a defensive coach. And a lot of Aggies are worried that, he's going to be a head coach soon. And he will. Like that's his goal. That's in his, that's his career aspiration is to be a head coach. Mm-hmm. And he's going to leave, in the next few years. But when he does, Jimbo is so respected nationally and we're going to have so much talent on this team at that point, and of course be able to pay any kind of salary that he's going to attract a high end DC, and I doubt we see much drop off.
Yeah,
I think we've covered the recruiting and the coaching style very well. One thing I forgot to mention is with Jimbo's coaching style, it's just very physical. Like, that was one thing I was worried about. With him coming in, like, can you teach a team to be physical if you don't have the best of the best players? And I think look no further than our offensive line last year. All being a few years into the program and finally fully healthy, and for the most part, just mauling teams up front. I think Jimbo's always going to have a physical team. That's just kind of his mantra.
Yeah, and I've got an anecdote there from when I went to one of the practices, and Jimbo, they were running, good against good. It was first team offense versus first team defense, and they were doing the 2-minute drill, and the offense ran a certain play, and they scored on it, and you see that on any practice, of course, but Jimbo stopped, and this was right when Damani Richardson started playing for the team. It was his first fall camp, and he stopped, walked over to Damani, and he was like, "Hey, do you understand why we did the route that we did there?" And he's like, "I want you to see." And so here he is. He's the offensive coach, and he's teaching this freshman, safety, and telling him, "Here's why we did that. Here's the why behind it," so that he could learn. And that was such a big impression on me, that I'm seeing, he wants his players to not only be physical, but he wants them to be knowledgeable and across the board, not just offense, and let Elko teach the defense. It was, hey, I'm going to teach my defensive players why we did what we did on offense, so that they could recognize that in the game. And it left a big impression on me.
Right. That's awesome. That's a great step, Chase. So we've been pretty positive in this update so far, and rightfully so. There's a ton to be excited about, and a lot of reasons pointing towards A&M being and becoming one of those elite programs. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about a few things that could hold us back and keep us from taking that next step. And the first one I want to touch on is style of play in terms of offense. You listen to some national guys, and you may hear like Jimbo's offense isn't as explosive as it needs to be to compete with the Alabamas of the world. Things changed here recently with Alabama going from, running the ball, protecting the clock kind of thing, to where now they have, a bunch of first round receivers and they're just airing it out. Mm-hmm. And now, all the top teams do that. I don't know if we've seen Jimbo's offense. I think what we've seen at A&M so far, I don't think that's what it's going to look like this year or in the future. One thing that we talked about before the show was if you compare the 2013 Florida State team that won the title, they were, just as explosive as teams are today, but they, did it with running and throwing. And we're today, most of the top teams are through the air. But
well, and this is one of those things that you can't fully hang your hat on because it's a mentality difference. We talked about how we struggled against LSU all through Sumlin's tenure. And if you look at how the difference in thought process between our two teams were at the time, LSU was controlling the ball, and they were controlling the time of possession. That is very much how Jimbo has taken our team to where we control the ball. We keep it out of the other offense's hands by just methodically going down the field. And so when you're going against an electric offense, you're going against, like a Johnny Manziel and Mike Evans, and you keep the ball out of their hands and you control the ball for, 10 minutes and a quarter, well, you're keeping them from being able to do what they do best, by just methodically getting 3 and 4 and 5 yards a play and just letting that clock just work against them, because you're using that against that team. And so we've seen a lot of that with Jimbo, and that's why you've seen him win games against teams that are really high-flying electric offenses. At the same time, that could come back to hurt you, because, if they jump in and still are able to score right away, then you see what we saw against Alabama, where they put up a ton of points and we didn't really match that,
Yeah. I think, it's so unfortunate that Caleb Chapman went down in that Florida game, because I think, like, in that game, I think that is Jimbo's offense kind of in a nutshell. Like, he's going to run the football. He's going to try to run the football, and he's going to take deep shots. Mm-hmm. And in that game, like when we had that threat, he took them. And even when the pass was incomplete, it still caused a PI because they were so concerned about that threat. So
sure.
Hopefully Caleb is healthy this fall. I think he will be. And I think the offense will look different than what we've seen, in these first 3 years. And we'll get to that in some upcoming episodes.
And we've talked about the physicality that we have. That physicality is so, so important. But his play style, a lot of people, if you look back, and I keep feeling like I'm dogging on Sumlin, I'm not. But if you look back to our tenure with Sumlin, what was the thing that we said every single season? Well, we came out strong. We went 5-0, 6-0, and then we fell off in November. And, well, why was that the case when Jimbo's sitting here winning November, a lot of times? Well, what that is you look at the amount of time played, the amount of snaps that you see per game, and by the end of the season, a Sumlin team would have played 3 or 4 games more than a Jimbo team did, just because they had so many more snaps in the game, and that wears on a team after a while, especially if you don't have the depth to make up for it. And so I think part of the reason why we've been a pretty slow moving offense to this point is because we're still building that depth. And then now that I really do feel like we have the depth that we need, I do expect that we'll see a lot more deep threats and things like that, even coming into this season ahead of us. But, the 2022 season, I really expect that we'll see a lot more of that,
Yeah. I think we talked last night about how Jimbo even kind of let that slip, or maybe it was intentional at a coach's night. Mm-hmm. I can't remember what city it was in, but he pretty much flat out said, we moved a little bit slower to protect our secondary on defense because we had some young guys back there and not a ton of depth. And he went on to say that we have that depth. So I think I would expect to see something different and maybe even some more tempo thrown in there.
Sure.
But to kind of wrap us up here, the last thing that could hold us back is probably the biggest thing, and that is Nick Saban is still employed at Alabama. He just signed an extension through 2028. I know Jimbo doesn't care. He's going to beat his ass while he's there, right?
That's what he says.
That's what he says. But as a fan, I really hope that Saban doesn't fulfill that 2028 contract. He's to be brief, Saban is the GOAT. He's built Alabama into the most dominant and efficient college football program that we've ever seen. Mm-hmm. And you might see Jimbo break through and knock him off, not, knock them down, but you can steal a few wins, and you're gonna have to, and hopefully this year's at home. They're bringing in a new quarterback. I know we are too, but that's a a huge conversation for a separate episode that we're very pumped about. But
Yeah.
as long as Saban's still around, it makes it just, that much more difficult to really break through and ascend.
Yeah, and it makes it to where, if we could have a season like we had this last season, where we have a really good team that could have probably beaten almost every team in the nation, could have beaten Alabama, didn't happen. But because of that, we got left out of the college football playoff, and that hurts. But at the same time, we're always going to deal with that. And even once Saban's gone, there's no doubt in my mind that Alabama's going to replace him with a really good coach,
Oh yeah,
because
he's put the infrastructure in place to set them up for whoever to come in, and it's going to be a good coach.
Absolutely.
I think that does it. Man, that feels good.
Yeah.
First real episode. I appreciate you guys sticking around if you're still tuned in. And like I said at the beginning, go subscribe, go leave us a 5-star rating, leave us a review, send us an email, give us some feedback at ineligiblepod@gmail.com. Follow us at ineligiblepod on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can follow me at WillstoneCFB on Twitter and Instagram. You can follow Chase at Texas Aggies 15 on Twitter.
There's no S in that.
Show,
it's just Texas Aggie 15, but
Texas Aggie. Yeah. Don't follow Texas Aggie.
I don't know if it exists, so that should help.
And our next show will be coming out next week. I think we're going to delve more into the recruiting, just because there's so much there's so much in that topic that we want to get to and discuss with you guys. So be looking for that next week. And thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time.